All right, welcome back again to the video reviews. This one is going to look at the westward expansion era of the U.S. history. You guys know this one really well. When we did the survey in class a couple weeks ago, the vast majority of you said, you know what, westward expansion, totally got it, understand it. And so because of that, I won't spend but a couple of minutes walking you through this. We have the growth of the United States. We fought our revolution. We have our government. We've kind of gone past the baby stage, and now we're growing. Now we are a growing child. And you can see here on the map that we have the original 13 colonies right here. At the end of the American Revolution, we get all this land here from Great Britain, from the Treaty of Paris, most specifically this land up here, Northwest Territory. I'm circling it with my mouse. We have Thomas Jefferson giving us the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. And then, of course, the bigger ones you need, the remaining ones, I should say, are the annexation of Texas. We also have the Mexican Cession, the Oregon Country up here, and the Gadsden Purchase. Louisiana Purchase came from France. Texas was obviously an independent country. We have the Mexican Cession coming from Mexico, and the Oregon Country comes from Great Britain as well. And then, of course, a little bit of kind of state here at the bottom, Florida Cession came from Spain. Okay, the first one that we really moved into and settled was the Northwest Territory. When we got this land at the end of the American Revolution and the Treaty of Paris, we basically had to decide, how are we going to expand? How are we going to let people move into this new territory? We're just going to do it crazy. We're just going to let people run into the new territory, grab a fence, say, this is my land. How are we going to do it? And that's where the Northwest Ordinance came in. And it basically said that if an individual moves into this Northwest Territory, they're going to be treated exactly the same as if they were living in Pennsylvania. They're going to be treated the exact same as if they were living in Virginia. And that was the big precedence. I keep saying that word, a precedence, but that was the example that was set, and that was the example that was followed throughout the rest of westward expansion. All right, Louisiana Purchase, we know, came from Thomas Jefferson in 1803. This is where we get people like Lewis and Clark going out to explore this new land. It's where we get Lewis and Clark finding Sacagawea. It's where we get this idea of mountain men, where they just live out in the woods. They live by killing a bear, skinning it, eating it, wearing the bear skin as clothes. And so this is that myth of the mountain man comes from this time period of the exploration in the Louisiana Purchase. All right, we have Texas joining the U.S. Think back to your 7th grade year. You learned about Texas history. You learned that Texas broke away from Mexico. Texas was a country for around 10 years. And then it said, you know what? We kind of want to join the U.S. And part of the reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason they wanted to join the U.S. is they wanted the protection of the United States from Mexico. Because Mexico obviously was never very happy about losing Texas. And you have Santa Anna, he was the general at the Alamo. He won the Battle of the Alamo. He lost the Battle of San Jacinto, went back to Mexico, and now he's in charge again. And now he's trying to, seek revenge, if you will, from Texas. And we end up with this war. James K. Polk is the president. And who was at fault for the war, don't really know. Basically what happened is you had Mexican soldiers moving north into Texas saying, you know what, the border is actually right here, when the agreement was that the border was the Rio Grande. And so Mexico is slowly moving farther north and farther north, taking land from Texas. And so James K. Polk sends troops down to where the Mexican soldiers are, and they're just kind of sitting just ridiculously close. And when you put two people together who hate each other, that a fight eventually starts. And so we have the Mexican-American War. Goes on for a little bit. It ends with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And it said, you know what, the border is the Rio Grande River, period. No question. No discussion. It's the Rio Grande River. This is the border between Texas and Mexico. At the end of the war, it also gave the Mexican Cession to the U.S. as well, which is where we get states like California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, a little bit of New Mexico, and Colorado. All right, and so we know that later we get the Gadsden Purchase from Mexico as well to complete the railroad. Oregon Country, we get from Great Britain. We didn't fight a war over it. We just, which is an agreement. We have the Oregon Trail starting now. Is where we start getting families trying to start life over. They jump into a covered wagon. They're moving west. They're moving to Oregon. They're moving to Santa Fe. They're moving to Utah for religious freedom. And this is where we start having a heavy migration west. The last couple pieces, as I already mentioned, Gadsden Purchase is this little purple area right here on the map. They were trying to complete a railroad. We needed that piece of land. There was no war. The U.S. just bought it from Mexico. And then, of course, we get Florida from Spain. And then we have not just westward expansion, but we have this idea of manifest destiny, this idea that it is God's will that we as a country are from sea to shining sea. This is the iconic picture associated with manifest destiny. And if you look in detail at this picture, there's a lot of symbolism in it. I'm going to use my mouse a little bit here, but we have the Indians right here who are being forced west. You can kind of see them running towards the west. And we can think back to Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears. We have these men here that kind of look like the mountain men that we already kind of discussed with Lewis and Clark. We have the stagecoaches here, or the Conestoga wagon moving west right here. Here's the stagecoach. We have the railroad moving west, and I'm circling it with my mouse here. We actually have 3 railroads here. If you look carefully in the background, you can see the steamboat Robert Fulton created moving as well. And of course, we have our angel here moving west, and you can see what's in her hand. And I'm once again using my mouse, but we can see we have this cable wire. We have the telegraph wire going west as well. And so everything in this picture is symbolic of this era of moving west. Manifest destiny, like I said, was the idea that God willed us to move west. There's nothing wrong with believing God wanted you to move from sea to shining sea. It got a little bit dicey when people started hurting others in the name of manifest destiny. Nothing wrong, like I said, nothing wrong with moving west, but when we start using it as an excuse to be selfish and we start using it as an excuse to hurt people like the Indians, that's when it got into some problematic areas. Okay, here in the same time, we have the Industrial Revolution. We have this revolution being kickstarted by the War of 1812. When we were blockaded by the British, we had to do what we had to do to survive. And so we start getting the steamboat by Robert Fulton. We get the cotton gin, which Eli Whitney created the cotton gin. This was massive in terms of the southern plantation owners who grew cotton. And actually, slavery was on the downfall until the cotton gin came along, and it just made it so much more efficient to raise cotton and to harvest cotton. We get railroads moving west. We get the telegraph. Couple people you need to remember. We looked for about a week on these different reform movements. We have Susan B. Anthony dealing with women's suffrage. That doesn't mean women are suffering. It means that they have the right to vote. We have Henry David Thoreau, which you guys read some of when you made your Mexican-American War videos. He wrote a book called Civil Disobedience. How did Henry David Thoreau disobey civilly, if you will? If you remember, he was against the Mexican-American War, and he basically refused to pay taxes. And that was his civil disobedience. We have Sojourner Truth, which was an abolitionist. We have Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was also big into women's rights. They created a Declaration of the Rights of Women in Seneca Falls, New York. I know a couple years ago there was a very specific question about her on the test, so just be aware of her. We have Horace Mann, increasing public education, making it better for the common person. And this gets me to my wave theory of life that I talked to you guys about, because I think this plays into a key thing that we have to remember. My wave theory of life is basically this. All of humanity's purpose is to be free. And so when you are free, you are at the top of the wave. And then as life moves forward, people will try to take your freedom from you, and that's you going down. So the very top of the wave is freedom, the bottom of the wave is being enslaved. And so all of life is trying to be free, and then someone trying to take your freedom from you, and then you're fighting to get it back. And so this is where we get things like the First Great Awakening. The First Great Awakening was right before the American Revolution. The First Great Awakening was a religious revival. You have Christianity spreading like wildfire, throughout the colonies. and there's this idea of we are enslaved, we need to be free. And so this is where we get freedom from King George. And then we get the Second Great Awakening, which was another Christian revival that spread throughout the colonies. And this happened right before the Civil War. And so the freedom being obtained during the First Great Awakening was freedom from King George. The freedom being obtained after the Second Great Awakening was freedom for the slaves. And so I find this to be an interesting pattern. That there's always this revival of what's right and what's wrong right before these massive moves for freedom. You can also, there's some people who argue that there has been a Third Great Awakening right around the time of World War II, which obviously freed Europe from people like Mussolini and Hitler and Stalin. And so there's this, it's an interesting thing to think about, that there's always these type of revivals where people are deciding what is right, what is wrong, and then they do something about it. American Revolution, Civil War. Just an interesting thought to think about. And that's all I have for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for studying. You're going to do awesome. I will see you guys at school.